Welcome to our panel, Accreditation and Transfer Student Success, Connecting the Dots Among Equity, Quality, and Outcomes. We're excited to be recording this today for the NISTS conference, and we're grateful to NISTS for providing a virtual opportunity for us to have this conversation. It is hard to get these people into the same room in real time, and so we're grateful that we have this chance. So I'm Alison Kadlec. I'm a partner at Sova, and I'm the moderator for this session. We have a tremendous group of participants, panelists here. Lara Couturier is a principal at Sova, co-leading the credit mobility and transfer work. Lara is also the facilitator of the Beyond Transfer Policy Advisory Board, which you'll hear a little bit more about in the course of this. Shirlitha Dunlap is Dean and Professor of the Mary Black Endowed Chair for Nursing at the University of South Carolina Upstate. Maria Hesse is Professor of Practice in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College and former Vice Provost at Arizona State University. And Jamienne Studley is the President of WSCUC, Wask Senior College and University Commission, also known as Wask. Sova has partnered with WSCUC to work with 4 WASC accredited institutions to better understand the relationship among credit mobility, transfer, equity, outcomes, and institutional excellence and performance. And we are excited to connect this work and to have had this work appear as the result of the ongoing efforts of the Beyond Transfer Policy Advisory Board. This work has been funded by the CMC Foundation. We want to say thank you to them for providing the space for us to explore these important issues, the relationship between credit mobility, transfer, institutional effectiveness, excellence, and outcomes for today's students. And as part of this work, and I'm going to hand it here to Lara to give us a little bit more context, the Beyond Transfer Policy Advisory Board has been engaged for the last couple of years in issues related to really pushing boldly conversations around credit mobility and transfer. Dr. Hesse and Dr. Lee are both part of the Beyond Transfer Policy Advisory Board and have agreed to join us here today to dig into the conversation about how and why accreditation appeared as an issue and what we're learning and where we go from here. So before we dive into the conversation, I want to turn it to Lara to share a little bit about the Policy Advisory Board.
Great. Thank you, Alison. I like to refer to my work with Beyond Transfer Policy Advisory Board as my biggest professional privilege because it's a group of 12 absolutely outstanding brains. We refer to them as expert practitioners because the Policy Advisory Board members really understand how challenging and complex transfer and credit mobility are. And so they were selected as people who really know that improving transfer and credit mobility requires a lot of work, it requires connecting the dots with a lot of stakeholders, and really requires work on all fronts, including policy and institutional practice. The members were selected based on a set of criteria, including that they are known as people who are laser focused on equity. They understand equity and they see how transfer and credit mobility are levers for improving equity in the country. One of the big things that emerged in the early work of the board was as the board was working on a set of state policy recommendations, the board members kept saying, we really need to engage accreditors over and over and over. Like we need to take this conversation about stakeholders to the next level and bring accreditors in. And so that was really part of the impetus for this work is the board's own interest. So I'll turn back to you now, Alison.
Thanks so much, Lara. So to kick us off here, I just want to begin by asking why are we all interested in this topic? Why, Maria, were you, and Shirlitha, why were you interested in this topic? Want to hear from you as members of the Policy Advisory Board, also as institutional practitioners and leaders, and then turn it to Jamie to hear more about why it was that WASC wanted to be a part of this conversation.
Sure. So I might preface my remarks by just saying that I'm a former community college president of many years and also a university administrator. So I have perspectives on transfer from both the community college and university viewpoints. So We felt that accreditors, particularly regional accrediting agencies, had a unique influence over institutions. And because nearly all colleges and universities want to remain eligible for federal aid programs, and they want their credits to be able to transfer to other institutions, so they want to be accredited. So exploring the possibility of improving transfer through accrediting agencies was something we believed should really be considered. It was one of the only systemic levers available that's pervasive enough in nature to drive the type of change needed on behalf of transfer students, because it crosses state, system, and institutional borders. Thus, it seemed to us that working with accrediting agencies to encourage institutions to examine their transfer student success was one solution that could potentially create change at scale. Also, accreditors' concerns for assessing quality are really well aligned with institutional concerns about quality. Accreditation is a signal that a college or a university is an institution of excellence, and one that's willing to examine itself and work towards constant improvement. So if accreditors asked community colleges and universities to examine their credit mobility and their transfer student success, institutions would respond. And over time, the culture of higher education would reflect the assumption that the success of our transfer students is a marker of quality in higher education.
Great, thank you. Shalita, what brought you into this conversation? Why were you one of the policy advisory board members saying we really need to dig deeper here?
Well, for me, I would say as a dean of nursing, probably as many deans, you're always in the crosshairs of students needing to transfer and their ability for their credit to apply to their transcript for them to get to graduation and degree completion. And a lot of times, even when I approach such situations with students individually, and I go back and I try to figure out, okay, can this student get this course here? I'm told, okay, well, our accreditors won't let us do that, or we can't do that because of accreditation. And the question I always ask is why, and thinking about how we look at this a little bit more closely and a little bit more deeply, and understanding that when we think about accreditation, and sometimes when we try to create it as a barrier, that we are the them. I mean, accrediting bodies consist of us, faculty and administrators, and we make up what the accrediting body and what the accrediting guidelines look like. And so how can we better improve that by being a part of the solution?
Great, thank you. All right, so Jamie, what interested you in this topic, and why did you agree to join us in this work?
Well, I was delighted to have the invitation on behalf of WASC to do this and to engage as a partner and an ally. Sometimes accreditation is seen as the authority, the police officer, and it's good to be the ally and co-explorer in the ways that Maria and Shalita have described. I also appreciate that they've introduced us in the best possible ways, that accreditors are rarely the barrier to the degree that people on campus sometimes, I think the current word is weaponize for their own purposes. Wask and I had a very practical motivation for coming to the subject of transfer, motivated by a wonderful piece I had seen Alison write that got me thinking about how we could marry interests and your projects. We have a several-year-old activity called Better Conversations, Better Data. A shout out to Lumina Foundation for its support of that initiative. And the conversations that we want to have need to be relevant, pragmatic, and welcoming. Just like a teacher who's looking for a good topic for a class, you want to choose things that the entire class can be interested in when you're building core skills. So two of the central things that WASC is committed to deepening are commitment to equity and use of evidence into action, using the data that we have and the data that people need to solve their problems or know how they're doing in achieving their goals. But people can be scared off by both of those. Equity conversations can be frightening. People worry about missteps. They're not sure that they're conveying their ideas in a way that will be safe in the conversation. And many people are frightened of data or think that it's out to get them in some strange way. But when you talk about transfer and credit mobility, you can talk about people, and you can talk about students, and you can talk about everyday practices that people are familiar with. So to us, on a very basic level, it was a way to do the work that we wanted to do on equity and data and evidence across the institution, and thought that transfer could be a way to come into those while working on a very core policy and student success issue that affects a very large proportion of students. It's not a niche, it's not a tiny little outlier. It is central to our ability to have equitable student success. And accreditors have an accountability responsibility, but we also are dedicated to an improvement role. And at most of our institutions, that's the job that we are doing, is helping them get better. It's not a question of whether an institution has met minimum standards. It's whether they're achieving their own missions and doing it better every day.
Wonderful, thank you. So I want to dig in here now and get into some of the things that we learned and what we think the implications are for the field. And so I'm going to turn it to Lara now to talk a little bit about the broader engagement and some of the bigger lessons learned.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we worked very closely with WASC and with Jamie and her colleagues, but we also wanted to make sure that we were talking to a number of accreditors and stakeholders for accreditation around the country. And so we launched into a set of interviews to try to understand more about the full landscape. And we learned a ton. It was incredibly exciting and productive research, but I'll highlight a few quick things that were very useful in the way that then the Policy Advisory Board thought about putting together some recommendations. One is, I just want to pick up on a theme that that Charlitha and Jamie have already talked about, which is this idea of, the weaponization of, the accreditor won't let us. And we just learned, no matter, who we talked to, that is just not true, right? That at the end of the day, it's institutional policy that's really dictating how credits are transferring and applying to program. And so we just need to sort of remove that that accreditor won't let us language from the conversation, because all too often it's really not true. And it's also a situation where, these policies and standards are online. I spent a lot of time in them. They're actually quite easy to read and to sift through. It's a part of a brief that's coming out this week, tells people how to go and just sort of look at their accreditor policies and see what is and is not in there. Another big thing, though, is that as of this moment, the policies and standards for accreditation don't talk a lot about transfer and credit mobility at all, and language that's a little bit more nuanced, like portability of credit or applicability of credit, is not showing up. And so, part of what we really would like to do is work with accreditors to strengthen the approach to transfer and credit mobility, in recognition that for many institutions in the country, transfer students make up a huge proportion of their student body, and that the majority of learners in the year 2023 would benefit from improved credit mobility. And so we really want to link to institutional mission around the mentions of transfer and accreditation, and the way that mentions of transfer and accreditation policies and how that's showing up. Another thing is we just want to note that accreditors are an incredibly diverse group of organizations. And so we found just a huge difference in how accreditors approached this topic. Jamie is very welcoming, wants to be a part of the conversation. Several of her colleagues were quite similar, but we also found many colleagues in accreditation who weren't willing to talk to us in the interviews, or who came quite wary and worried that perhaps this was a gotcha moment, that we we were reporters, for example. And so, really want to make the point that we're trying to invite accreditors into this. We want to have a conversation about accreditation as a solution. And we're really excited to continue to engage with the accreditors that came sort of wide open and excited to have the conversation. So those are just some top level highlights.
Great, thanks, Lara. And I do want to dig in here for a minute, Jamie, with you about what we learned and what are some of your takeaways as an accrediting agency from the case study work that Sova was able to do with 3 of your institutions and a bonus. So 4 institutions that are WASC accredited, where we did a series of 4 deep dive learning sessions with teams that included the accreditation liaison officer and other critical stakeholders from a group of institutions that represent quite a diverse array of institutions that WASC accredits. So we had CSU Bakersfield in the mix, University of Hawaii, West Oahu, University of Laverne, a small private institution, and then UCLA was a bonus case that we were able to include in the conversation. And, through those deep dive conversations that Sova had with these teams, we learned a number of things and had affirmed for us a number of things that we know about the barriers to credit mobility and transfer student success, and how institutions think about that, grapple with it, and engage it, given the differences in institutional mission and context, size of institutions, the diversity of student populations, the tremendous diversity of what a transfer student is, right? So many different kinds of students, from dual enrollment high school students to students coming in with an associate's degree to students arriving with 3, 4, 5, 7 transcripts from previous learning experiences, right? Returning adults. So a huge, tremendous array of diversity in institutions. And the complexity of the reality that transfer is about enrollment, and enrollment is about dollars, and short-term perspectives and perceptions around incentives, financial disincentives, or threats for around competition for enrollment, things like that, enrollment decline concerns. All of these issues factor into a lot of the experiences that institutions have as they think about the work that they're doing to improve outcomes and equity for transfer students. But then connecting those dots to accreditation, right, to the experience of accreditation, the process of accreditation. There was a lot of really interesting and rich conversation that came from that. And so and I'm happy to dig in a little more, but want to give you a chance, Jamie, to say a little bit about your perspectives about what we learned from listening to your institutions and what it means for you all.
I'm interested to hear from everyone. I would underline something that's implicit in what we're saying, which is when accreditors ask, people listen. There is an authority that sometimes turns into that the accreditor made me or the accreditor won't let me problem. But when the accreditor says, we'd like to understand how you do this, or how do your transfer students do in terms of the success measures you've identified, people come up with an answer. And sometimes that answer takes them to exactly the kind of exploration that we want. It brings them to divide their transfer population into relevant groups. Is it veterans who are transferring? Is it people who are bringing high school level credits? What are the different patterns? Are there demographic differences? Transfer overlaps with a lot of other issues. So in some cases, it's a doorway. Transfer might relate to whether a student is going part-time or full-time, or the age of the students, or where they got their experience. Or an important one, when you think about institutions that students are coming to, if they've received all of their introductory level courses or all of their general education at another institution, how does that relate to their ability to develop the competencies that you are looking for here as the place that is welcoming those transfers and committed to achieving a full educational picture for those students? We don't mention transfer in our new standards. That was intentional. We had a very limp criterion around transfer and said, it's not a separate issue, it's a component of all of the others. And so our focus is on credit mobility and on student success. And then we ask institutions to disaggregate their numbers to understand that success. And the disaggregation can be on classic equity and population measures, but it also means disaggregate them to watch any pattern that you think is important to understanding what your institution is doing and how well it's succeeding.
Great, that's great. So from the perspective of having done, participated in and facilitated those deep dive sessions with your institutional participants that were so generous with their time, it is clear that accreditation looms large in the mind of institutional stakeholders. And, as we've discussed here, there are a lot of myths that need busting. But as you're saying, Jamie, the flip side of that is that, when accreditors ask questions, that people listen, right? Institutions listen, and it creates the opportunity for new kinds of conversations and reflection and dot connecting. I think it's, one of the things that we hear repeatedly, and I want to make sure that we dive in here with some of the recommendations from the Policy Advisory Board with Shalitha and Maria. Some of the things that we heard from institutions is that, the institution-wide experience of accreditation and the incredible array of silos that are touched by issues related to credit mobility and transfer student success that's an auspicious combination, right? As an institution-wide experience, accreditation is a powerful opportunity for cross-silo communication and collaboration. It provides a frame of reference for connecting dots among equity, institutional effectiveness, outcomes. And accreditors are well positioned to help institutions access and use data to build healthy cultures of inquiry grounded in a commitment to equitable student success. It is a newer trend in accreditation. I know you always resist, Jamie, being treated as sort of a special case. Like you are, we're so grateful because you're so willing to be a part of this conversation, and others are as well. But really, you are field leaders in this work of helping your institutions have better conversations, use better data as a vehicle for those conversations. And so there is something really inspiring about that as we think about the broader array of your colleagues in the field and where they are in these conversations. So I want to kick it back now to Maria and Shalitha to talk a little bit about recommendations for the field. As you've been thinking about the work, discussing it with colleagues on the Policy Advisory Board, what are the most important things that need to be happening in the field?
Well, I guess I'll go first because I wanted to piggyback off of what Jamie just said about credit mobility and student success. And I think that's really an important point that you brought out, especially about looking at the data, because, a lot of times we look at the student as an individual, and looking at an individual doesn't give you that full picture. But when you really look at the data of an institution and you say, we had this many credits that were drop credits and were not applied to degree completion, or we had this many students who graduated in this length of time because we did take their credits, it paints a different picture. So I really appreciate her mentioning about asking the right questions, because I think when you think about recommendations for change and how you move forward, I think it starts with asking the right questions. And when I talked about we are the them and people saying, okay, well, we can't do this because of accreditation. Sometimes it just means you just need to ask the right questions, because they may say, well, this is what it says, but have you looked at the document yourself? Are you sure this is from accreditation, or is this just an institutional policy or practice, something that we've quote unquote always done? And now it's in a policy because it's so embedded in the culture that people start applying it to something that it didn't even exist with in the first place. And doing the investigation, and also another key piece to it is interpretation. And I see this a lot of times. People will read a policy and they interpret it the way that they want to interpret it, but they totally skip over the fact that it says maybe a may or an exception, or sometimes there are other words in that statement that gives a way for us to say, this is a unique situation. this student comes to us very differently than maybe any other student who's ever come to us before. How can we take this policy that you may have read to be hard and fast, that it's no way to change it, but looking at the words in it that says, okay, there is a way to make an exception. There is a way to do something different. So I challenge individuals to investigate, ask the right questions, and then also look at interpretation in order as a recommendation for moving forward and for change. And also I encourage people to be a part of the solution. And I say that over and over again, because I say we are the them. Our accrediting bodies always have opportunities for third-party comments, for us to provide feedback. Maybe there is a policy that's a barrier. Who knows? Sometimes that does exist, but we have the ability to make a change. We have the ability to make a difference. We have ability to reach out to our accreditors and to post statements and provide third-party comments and feedback that says, hey, you know what, this is a barrier, or this is a policy that's impeding our ability to be able to help students be successful. Is there a possibility that you would consider changing it or looking at it in a new light? Most accrediting bodies take those recommendations very seriously. They look at them, they review them, and they use that, because accrediting bodies want us to have continuous improvement. So fortunately, they do the same thing. They look at continuous quality improvement as well within their own organizations. And so those are some of my recommendations for change.
Great, thank you. All right, Maria, what do you think?
Yeah, so Shirlita, I love that idea of be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So in general, I know several of these things have been said during our session, but I think they're worth reiterating, that we recommend that transfer and credit mobility be inextricably linked to institutional mission. These topics need to be a key part of how community colleges and universities demonstrate quality and show their commitment to continuous improvement, particularly for those institutions that serve significant populations of students who are mobile. And in the process of examining transfer student success, the hard questions need to be asked to deepen our inquiry around equitable outcomes for all of our students. So, for example, community colleges can look at student intent to transfer and examine whether or not students are taking the appropriate courses and making good progress towards their preferred major or their area of study. And universities need to take a good look at how long credit evaluation takes, how many credits transfer, but more importantly, how many of them apply to the chosen major, and whether students have good access to key student support, such as financial aid and scholarships, advising, housing, and enriching learning experiences. And of course, what Jamie and Lara and others have said, the data needs to be disaggregated to examine equitable outcomes for different student populations and equitable access to those majors that lead to high-paying jobs.
Great, thank you. So we're sort of reaching the end of our time here. This is going to be a tight conversation, but before we sign off, Lara mentioned that there is a white paper coming out this week at the time of this recording, which is January 17th. Not sure when this will air for NISTs, but this is the white paper will be out in the world on the 19th of January. And I just want to ask, Jamie, I'm going to turn it to you, but open it up for anybody to dive in here as well. Why do you think people should be paying attention to the white paper that is coming out on accreditation? And, what does it mean to you and as you think about your colleagues, your accreditation colleagues?
One reason to pay attention is that it's very thoughtful and it's very practical. It has some really good suggestions that can be used by people in different parts of the institution. We've talked about the value of both the transfer conversation and accreditation as bringing people together. It's always fascinating when the registrar's office meets the institutional research people, meet the academic affairs leaders, and suddenly discover that they can do better when they work together. A quick footnote I'd like to add is that accreditation comes in at least two major dimensions. Institutional accreditors who operate at a fairly broad level and includes all the historically regional accreditors, and then specialty and professional accreditors. And Shirlita's comments about the specifics, does this rule or policy really drive what you're doing? Are there exceptions? Sometimes we have found that in order to meet professional expectations, state licensing requirements, and so forth, that it's the specialty and professional accreditors who also need to be included in the conversation. Any institution may have literally dozens of them with whom they deal. And it is very possible that some of the sense of constraint comes from the intersection of state law, licensing requirements, professional requirements, institutional requirements, and the institutional accreditor. And we know that people who have to make decisions have a lot that they have to worry about. If we can all think about this in terms of effectiveness for students, then we have a pathway to say what facilitates student success in all of its dimensions and what stands in the way. I thought Maria's suggestion that we get beneath the broadest issues to the really, really practical ones. Who makes this decision? What are they rewarded for? Where have you seen successes within your institution that you can apply to other places? So it's a pleasure to work with all of you. And as this work continues, I just really respect the thoughtfulness that you've all brought to it.
Great, thank you. All right, any final thoughts from any of our panelists here?
Well, I'll just say, you know, as far as the white paper coming out, you know, I encourage everyone to read it and to be a part of it and see how it can help you in your practice. Coming off the Martin Luther King Day of Service really helps me to think about what I can do for others. And it really has some things in there that you can do to help serve others. Because when we look at transfer across the board, low income minorities are disadvantagedly affected. And so just really looking at the needs in the community that we can serve and help, I think it offers a lot of valuable input on what you can do and how your 1% can be helpful.
Well, and I just want to thank all the practitioners and researchers that are deeply involved with the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students for continuing to raise awareness about and to bring forth data about transfer students.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, on that note, we will conclude here and thank you all for participating. We're grateful for your time today.
It's good to work with you all.
Thank you.